Curators were a species of profound and unyielding order. For millennia untold, they had served as the self-appointed guardians of galactic history. Their archives a meticulously organized repository of all known cosmic knowledge. Their society was a monument to logic. Every interaction, every decision, every nanosecond accounted for and optimized. The universe, in their collective view, was a vast, intricate, but ultimately solvable equation, and they were its most dedicated mathematicians. Within these hallowed, silent archives, Earth, or Sol III, as it was formerly catalogued, was a depressing and thankfully minor entry. Species classification: 7749 Delta, primates Homo sapiens, dominant traits: high internal aggression, paradoxical altruism, demonstrable self-destructive tendencies, prone to rapid, unstable technological advancement without corresponding ethical maturity. The curator's official projection, updated every standard century, was expected self-annihilation within galactic standard millennium due to resource mismanagement or internal conflict. Humans were a chaotic, messy blip on the grand, ordered screen of galactic existence, a problem expected to solve itself. They were, for all intents and purposes, best ignored. Far from the well-traveled star lanes, shrouded in nebulae and uncharted space, lay the Etherid network. It was a colossal, ghost-like latticework of dormant sensors and inexplicable energy conduits, built by a precursor civilization that had vanished eons before the curators had even begun their grand project of cataloging the cosmos. Its original purpose was believed to be the monitoring of cosmic string fluctuations, the very underpinnings of reality, but its true functions and full capabilities remained an enigma, lost to time. For countless ages, it had been silent, a forgotten relic. Then it woke up, or rather, it began to die. Not with a dignified fade, but with a screaming, dissonant roar. The Etherid network didn't just malfunction, it erupted in a cascade of chaotic data screams that overloaded nearby curator listening posts. Phantom energy readings materialized and vanished, creating ghost fleets on long-range sensors. Localized spacetime began to warp and unravel around its nodes, twisting starlight into impossible geometries. It was as if a symphony orchestra, comprised of dying stars and collapsing black holes, was tuning up for a concert of pure bedlam, each instrument broken, playing a different, horrifying song at maximum volume. The noise, as the curators reluctantly termed it, was not just an academic problem. It threatened to destabilize the local cluster of star systems, and if unchecked, could trigger a cascading resonance failure across the entire galactic fabric. The most brilliant minds of the established, orderly galactic civilizations, including the curator's own foremost logicians and xenoengineers, were utterly, comprehensively stumped. The precursor code underpinning the network was impossibly complex, operating on principles of multi-dimensional logic and quantum entanglement that defied their most advanced understanding of physics. Every attempt they made to impose order, to isolate the failing nodes, or to dampen the chaotic emanations, only made the situation exponentially worse. It was like trying to untangle a million snarled fishing lines in a hurricane, using only rigid, inflexible tools. Panic, a rare and deeply unsettling emotion for the curators, began to ripple through their normally unflappable ranks. The universe was not behaving according to their equations. Senior Curator Thuron Vex, his usually placid countenance etched with lines of unprecedented stress, felt the weight of impending galactic collapse pressing down on him. Standard protocols had failed. Conventional brilliance was insufficient. In a move born of sheer desperation, he initiated a highly unorthodox search through the galactic archives. He bypassed the usual search parameters: technological sophistication, energy output, societal cohesion. Instead, with a sense of quiet heresy that made his core processors ache, he instructed the archives to sift its vast data stores for any species, extant or extinct, with a documented history of thriving in, adapting to, or inexplicably resolving systems of profound, persistent chaos. His junior archivists looked at him as if he'd suggested consulting a random number generator for the solution. The archives, its crystalline core glowing with the effort, began its monumental task. It sifted through records of planetary cataclysms, analyzed species that had evolved in lethally volatile environments, and reviewed the histories of civilizations that had endured or succumbed to periods of extreme societal breakdown. Most results were, predictably, dead ends. Species that had been consumed by chaos, not those that had mastered it. The search seemed futile. Then a tiny, almost statistically insignificant entry, previously buried under layers of cautionary flags and dismissal notices, blinked onto the main console. Species classification: 7749 Delta. Habitat: Sol III. Common designation: humans. The specific data points that triggered the flag were not their numerous wars, their polluted atmosphere, or their bewilderingly inefficient economic models. Instead, the archives highlighted a bizarre collection of cultural artifacts and behaviors. There were references to massively multiplayer online cooperative and competitive emergent strategy simulations, complex virtual worlds where millions of individuals engaged in uncoordinated, often conflicting, yet sometimes surprisingly effective group actions. There were logs detailing globalized, unregulated information exchange networks prone to viral mimetic phenomena, the human internet, a seething morass of information, misinformation, and inexplicable cultural trends. And then, the most absurd trigger of all: a detailed, albeit third-hand, academic monograph from a Xyler anthropologist on a historical human event known as Twitch Plays Parkaman. The study described, with horrified fascination, how tens of thousands of anonymous, uncoordinated human participants, through a chaotic torrent of conflicting commands, had collectively controlled a single character in a primitive video game. The process was marked by nonsensical actions, prolonged periods of utter incompetence, and baffling deviations from any logical path. Yet somehow, against all odds and rational expectation, they had eventually, painstakingly, achieved the game's objectives. Thuron Vex and his assembled team of senior curators stared at the recommendation in stunned, horrified disbelief. Humans, the self-destructive, illogical primitives from that muddy little planet. Their last hope for saving the galaxy from a precursor technological apocalypse was to be found in video games and internet memes. The very idea was an affront to every principle of curator logic. It was absurd. It was insane. Yet the archives were implacable. Its cold, hard logic, operating on the parameters Thuron Vex himself had set, was irrefutable. With all other avenues exhausted, and the chaotic tendrils of the Etherid network spreading further with every passing cycle, a reluctant, almost deeply embarrassed, decision was made. A sleek curator vessel, its hull shimmering with advanced shielding against the network's chaotic emanations, performed a cautious, almost apologetic, first contact with the dominant governmental bodies of Earth. The curators didn't reveal the true scale of the galactic peril, nor did they request military aid or access to Earth's rudimentary advanced technologies. Instead, they presented a heavily filtered, vastly simplified version of the problem. They spoke of an unusual data sifting challenge, a highly complex and unpredictable informational anomaly that required a unique kind of expertise. They formally requested individuals experienced in navigating complex, unpredictable, and rapidly evolving information systems with nonlinear feedback loops and emergent behavioral patterns. They politely and pointedly omitted the part about saving the galaxy from total annihilation. Earth's authorities, thoroughly bewildered by the bizarrely specific yet maddeningly vague request from actual, honest-to-goodness aliens, scrambled to assemble an appropriate team. This wasn't a job for traditional scientists or military strategists. After much confused deliberation, they presented the curators with an unlikely collection of individuals who, on paper, looked more like candidates for a psychological evaluation than a first contact team. There was Anya Sharma, known in certain online circles as Glitch Queen, a semi-retired legend in the world of massively multiplayer online role-playing games. She was renowned for her uncanny ability to organize and lead thousands of unruly players in vast, chaotic digital raids. somehow wresting victory from the jaws of seemingly certain defeat through sheer improvisation and an intuitive understanding of mob psychology. Beside her was Leo Maxwell, a brilliant but deeply eccentric PhD candidate whose unfinished dissertation, Emergent Swarm Intelligence in Unregulated Digital Ecologies, from mimetic propagation to flash mob cohesion, was already gaining underground notoriety for its unconventional insights. And then there was Jax Nullbite Chen, a white-hat hacker with a mischievous grin and a legendary reputation for finding exploitable glitches and security holes in systems that corporate and government entities had declared unbreakable. He approached every complex system as a puzzle box, delighting in finding the cracks. Accompanying them was a quiet young woman named Hana Sequencebreak Kim, a speedrunner famous in her niche community for dismantling game logic and completing complex narratives in impossibly short times by exploiting unforeseen mechanics. This motley crew of gamers, hackers, and academic misfits arrived at a heavily shielded curator orbital station near the roiling, chaotic energies of the Etherid network. Thuron Vex, his composure maintained by centuries of practice, briefed them, his polite explanations carefully veiling a deep, almost palpable condescension. When the raw, unfiltered data streams from the network were finally displayed on the main view screen, a nauseating, epileptic torrent of screeching static, psychedelic color bursts, and dissolving, reforming symbols, the curator scientists braced themselves for the expected human reaction. Panic, confusion, perhaps even physical illness. Anya Sharma leaned forward, a slow smirk spreading across her face. "Ha," she said, tapping her chin. "Looks like a poorly moderated raid lobby got hit with a massive DDoS, then possessed by an eldritch horror from beyond spacetime. Nasty, but kinda fun. What are the loot tables like?" Leo Maxwell's eyes lit up. He began pointing excitedly at the swirling chaos. "Fascinating. Look at those recursive feedback loops. And those appear to be self-replicating error cascades, almost like mimetic viruses in the data stream. The fractal dimensionality is off the charts." Jax Chen cracked his knuckles. "Can I ping it? Are there any open ports, any debug logs we can access? Or hey, can we just try turning it off and on again? You guys try that yet?" Hana Kim simply watched, her head tilted, as if listening to a piece of particularly complex atonal music. The curators were aghast, speechless. These primitives, these children, were not taking a galactic-level extinction threat seriously. They were treating it like some kind of game. But then, the humans, given access, through heavily sandboxed and firewalled interfaces, of course, to the Etherid network's chaotic data streams, did something that defied all curator logic. They didn't try to impose rigid order. They didn't attempt to systematically analyze and categorize. They dived into the chaos. Anya, falling back on decades of experience leading unruly online armies, immediately started organizing. She designated the other human consultants, and soon roped in a few bewildered but intrigued junior curator technicians who were initially assigned to just monitor them into specialized teams. "Okay, Nullbite, you and Sequencebreak are on exploit hunting. Find the weak points, the glitches, anything that breaks this thing's programming. Leo, you're on meme patrol. Track those viral error things, see if we can weaponize them or create counter-memes." "My team," she said, gesturing to the curator techs who looked utterly lost, "we're going to try and aggro some of these main data streams. Poke 'em, see how they react, figure out their attack patterns. We need to map the threat table." She spoke in a bizarre jargon of DPS checks, buffs and debuffs, exploit windows, and kiting mobs that sounded like complete gibberish to the horrified senior curators observing from their pristine control room. Leo Maxwell, gleefully immersed in the data, identified several dominant, viral memes within the network's fractured code, self-replicating cascades of errors that were a primary source of the instability. But instead of trying to simply delete them, a tactic that had already failed spectacularly for the curators, he began working with Jax. Their goal: to design counter-memes, or firewall memes. These were tiny, elegant snippets of code, often based on human internet jokes or logical paradoxes, designed to be stickier and more virulent than the network's own errors. They aimed to redirect the harmful cascades, nullify them by introducing contradictory logic, or even hijack their replication mechanisms to spread stabilizing code, essentially using the network's inherent chaos against itself. Jax, with Hana Kim peering over his shoulder and occasionally offering cryptic but insightful suggestions, approached the precursor code like a speedrunner attacking a new world record. He wasn't interested in understanding the whole system. He was looking for sequence breaks, out-of-bounds glitches, and arbitrary code execution exploits, ways to bypass the corrupted, misbehaving sections of the network entirely and access underlying, hopefully stable core functions. If we can just clip through this wall of corrupted data, he muttered, fingers flying across his console, we might find a back door to the system admin. They worked erratically, fueled by imported Terran coffee and a shared competitive energy. They pursued multiple, often contradictory, approaches simultaneously. They failed fast, trying dozens of bizarre ideas, most of which did nothing, some of which made small sections of the network briefly worse, but a few of which yielded tiny, inexplicable successes. Information, hypotheses, and half-baked theories flew between them in a rapid-fire exchange that the curators, with their deliberate, peer-reviewed approach to knowledge, found utterly bewildering. And yet, from the observation deck, Thuron Vex and the other senior curators watched in a state of horrified fascination. What had initially looked like random flailing, like children banging rocks together, was beginning to yield tangible results. The network's chaotic output, the data streams that had threatened to tear reality apart, began to flicker. Small pockets of the vast, precursor grid would stabilize for brief moments. The dangerous energy spikes that threatened nearby stars became slightly less frequent, slightly less intense. It was then that the curators began to understand. Humanity's unique strength wasn't a superior intellect, nor was it advanced technology. It was their unparalleled, almost instinctive ability to find faint signals within overwhelming noise. It was their terrifying comfort with and adaptability to chaotic systems. It was their ingrained cultural habit of failing faster, of learning through relentless trial and error, and their baffling capacity to achieve emergent order through decentralized, seemingly uncoordinated, yet ultimately effective mass action. Their entire history, their volatile societies, their sprawling, ungoverned internet, even their seemingly frivolous games, had inadvertently been the perfect training ground for this exact crisis. Through a final, frantic series of improbable glitches, exploits chained together, and crowdsourced debugging that involved every human and a growing number of now enthusiastic junior curator technicians, the human team managed to isolate the core corrupted elements of the Ethelred network. They didn't repair it in the traditional sense. Instead, they rerouted its critical functions around the damage, contained the most virulent error cascades within self-nullifying loops, and in one audacious move, patched a critical precursor, stabilizing protocol using a snippet of code derived from a human-computer virus, modified to perform the opposite of its original function. The cacophony of the Ethelred network, the galactic death scream, subsided. It was replaced by a stable, rhythmic hum, the ancient precursor machinery settling into a quiescent, harmless state. The threat to the galaxy was neutralized. In the main curator control room, Thuron Vex and his colleagues were left in a state of profound, almost catatonic shock. Their meticulously constructed worldview, their entire understanding of logic, order, and intelligent problem-solving had been utterly and irrevocably upended. The self-destructive primitives from Sector 77, 49 Delta, using methods that approximated random chance and juvenile amusement, had succeeded where the combined intellect of the galaxy's greatest and most ancient minds had catastrophically failed. The news, when it was finally, reluctantly released by the curators, spread through the galactic networks like a shockwave. The initial reaction was widespread disbelief. This was followed by a grudging, bewildered awe. And then, for many of the older, more staid civilizations, a kind of cosmic dread settled in. Humanity, the species that played games while their own planet metaphorically, and sometimes literally, burned, the creators and consumers of internet nonsense, were now also, apparently, the masters of chaos. Galactic policy towards Earth underwent a rapid, dazed, and somewhat panicked re-evaluation. Sol III was no longer a ignorable footnote, a quarantined anomaly. Delegations from across the known galaxy began to arrive on Earth, not to offer aid, not to deliver condescending advice on societal management, but to humbly, almost nervously, request consultation. Human experts were suddenly in high demand for dealing with all manner of unpredictable, chaotic phenomena, from unstable wormhole formations to outbreaks of rogue AI consciousness to the perplexing fashion trends of the Huluvu. Anya Sharma, Leo Maxwell, Jax Chen, and Hana Kim became reluctant intergalactic celebrities. They found themselves trying to explain concepts like Zerg rushing, emergent memetics, buffer overflows, and TASing reality to baffled alien dignitaries with too many eyes and not enough sense of irony. The galaxy, it turned out, was a far more complex and unpredictable place than the curators had ever believed. And it was slowly dawning on the ancient races that, in such a universe, sometimes the ones who best understood the nature of chaos were those who had been born in it, who had embraced it, and who had, against all odds, learned to surf its unpredictable, exhilarating, and terrifying waves.